She thought she could get a black man removed from first class, with nothing more than a glance and a few well-placed insinuations. But when he calmly reached into his jacket and flashed a gleaming FBI badge, everything collapsed. Not just inside the cabin, but inside her entire illusion of control. Patricia Langford was a woman of power, long accustomed to a world that bent to the standards she believed she defined. With her tailored cream dress and designer carry-on gliding smoothly across the marble floors of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, she walked with the poise of someone who had always known she was different. She had flown the Dallas to DC route dozens of times, always first class, always greeted with the first glass of champagne, always treated like VIP royalty. To her, first class wasn't just a seat, it was a symbol of hierarchy, of status, of a social order she was sure she belonged at the top of. And on that fateful afternoon, everything seemed to follow its usual script. The soft lighting, the faint scent of citrus and new leather in the air. But the moment her eyes landed on seat 2A, her usual spot, everything froze. Sitting next to it was a black man. A sharp navy blue suit hugged his frame perfectly. His eyes were focused on the laptop screen, fingers gliding across the keyboard, with a calm confidence. He didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't appear nervous. He simply belonged. Patricia faltered mid-step. A flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Was there some sort of mistake? She set her bag down with a touch more force than necessary, eyes flicking toward the flight attendant. No reaction, no correction. She sat, face composed but nerves boiling beneath the surface. She shifted in her seat, deliberately nudging her bag against the man's arm. No reaction. She cleared her throat, then asked with mock politeness, "Excuse me, are you sure you're in the right seat?" Without even glancing up, he answered, "I am." That was it? No apology? No explanation? No deference? Heat rushed to her face. A rare and unwelcome sensation. Being dismissed. She scanned the cabin, searching for a sympathetic glance. But everyone was busy, reading magazines, settling luggage, sipping wine. No one noticed what she knew was wrong. She made a decision. This wasn't going to pass unnoticed. One raised eyebrow, a subtle lift of her finger. Ding. The attendant call button lit up. Patricia leaned back, adjusted her hair, and wore her best composed smile as the flight attendant approached. "I believe there's been a mistake. This gentleman may be in the wrong seat." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She spoke softly, with that practiced elegance, exactly how a proper lady handles such things. But in that moment, a quiet storm began to churn, and Patricia had no idea it was about to tear through the carefully curated world she thought would always be as secure as her first-class seat. "This passenger seems to be in the wrong seat." Patricia spoke with a polite half-smile, so refined that even the accusation sounded like a gentle reminder. Emily, the lead flight attendant, quickly approached with a tablet in hand. She scrolled through the passenger manifest, eyes scanning, line by line. Then she looked up and smiled. "No, ma'am. Mr. Daniel Stokes is in seat 2B. You're in 2A, exactly as listed on the flight plan." Patricia froze for a moment. That confirmation didn't just derail her original plan. It stripped her of control. "Ah, well, I just thought... I assumed there was a mix-up. I didn't expect..." Her voice trailed off, stuttering like someone trying to turn down the volume on their own spiraling emotions. She turned toward the window, but her mind was spinning. Beside her, the black man Daniel remained silent. No flinch, no explanation, not even a glance in her direction. And that silence? That's what made Patricia unravel. A man who didn't play by the rules. No apology, no nervous smile, no subtle plea for acceptance. He just existed, confidently, unapologetically, rightfully. She felt suffocated. The air was still smooth, the plane calm, but inside her a pressure system was building fast. She pressed the call button again. Emily. Returned, brows raised in subtle surprise. "Is there something else I can assist you with?" "I don't feel comfortable. I'd like to change seats. Is there an issue with your seat, ma'am? No, not the seat. Patricia lowered her voice, glancing sideways at Daniel. I just don't feel comfortable sitting next to this man. Emily was quiet for a beat. The atmosphere seemed to thicken. Let me check if any other seats are available. She tapped on her tablet, the screen's glow casting tension across her angled cheekbones as she maintained her composure. I'm sorry, but first class is full. If you'd like, I can look into availability in economy. Patricia's face stiffened. Economy? Yes, there are 2 open seats toward the rear. He can go back there. A quiet ripple swept through the cabin. Heads turned. A few passengers exchanged glances. One pulled out a phone, another clicked their tongue. The moment was no longer private. Emily folded her hands, her voice losing its softness. Ma'am, Mr. Stokes holds a valid first-class ticket. I cannot, and will not, ask him to move without just cause. Silence blanketed the space. Patricia felt the air constrict around her. I have the right to request relocation if I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. Those 4 words, I don't feel safe, were a ticking bomb. Daniel closed his laptop. Calmly. He turned to look directly at her, eyes steady, strong but not hostile. Emily took a breath. The passengers nearby sat straighter in their seats, sensing that what they were witnessing was no longer about a seating mix-up. Emily spoke carefully, her tone firm. Ma'am, are you stating that you feel threatened? I didn't say that. I just said I don't feel comfortable. I need to clarify, ma'am, because if you're implying a safety concern, I'll have to file an incident report with the flight deck and corporate. Nobody moved. Daniel didn't speak. His gaze held firm on Patricia. She was losing control, and she knew it. Her jaw tensed, her throat dry, but she didn't walk it back. And that's when Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. Slowly, calmly, deliberately. He opened his wallet and raised it to her eye level. A gold badge shimmered under the cabin lights. FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI badge flashed under the cabin lights, sharp and unmistakable, like a slap to the last shred of pride Patricia Langford had left. She froze. For a split second, the entire first-class cabin seemed to go still. No one spoke, no one smiled. Every pair of eyes locked onto the gleaming gold credentials in Daniel Stokes' hand. The sharp eagle emblem. The embossed words, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Unmistakable, unquestionable. A man seated ahead let out a low whistle. An older woman behind gasped, "Oh my, he's a federal agent." The young woman with her phone still filming zoomed in, her eyes wide, like she'd just witnessed a movie twist happening live, inches away. As for Patricia, she was frozen. Her hands clenched the armrests. Moments ago, she wore a look of composed superiority. Now her face had gone pale, like someone whose power had just been stripped away in an instant. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't overreact. He simply tilted his head and spoke evenly, calmly, without a trace of tension. Ma'am, if you'd like to file a formal report regarding your feeling of being unsafe, I'm happy to take your statement. Right now. The cabin air grew thick. Patricia swallowed hard, her throat dry, her pulse erratic. Her hands began to tremble, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes betrayed the panic now spreading like wildfire behind them. Emily, the lead flight attendant, stood by. Her posture still professional, but her tone dropped, firm and warning. Ma'am, I must remind you, making a false claim of feeling unsafe on a federal flight without specific grounds can be considered a deliberate attempt to defame and may be subject to federal penalties. Her words landed like a public sentence. Patricia remained silent, her cheeks flushed with heat. She couldn't say, "I didn't know." She couldn't say, "I didn't mean to." Because everything had been recorded. The young woman's phone was still filming. Someone across the aisle was already typing furiously. Another leaned over to whisper to their travel companion. No one came to Patricia's defense, not a single person. Daniel quietly folded his badge, slid it back into his jacket pocket, and returned to his laptop. No gloating, no smugness, no parting shot. He simply resumed typing as if nothing had happened. And that calm? That, more than anything, shattered Patricia. He didn't see her as a threat, just as a footnote, not worth a second thought. Emily's voice was gentle, but final. If you have no further official concern, ma'am, I ask that you remain seated and comply with in-flight protocols. We are preparing for departure. Patricia nodded faintly. She didn't argue. The stares were still fixed on her. Whatever she once held, status, deference, privilege, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The plane began taxiing. The engines hummed louder, but inside Patricia's head, all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the ping of notifications stacking up on her phone. 1, 2, 3, 4 new messages. Patricia, what the hell did you just do? This video is going viral. Did you seriously say that? They're calling you first-class Karen on Twitter. Patricia glanced at the screen, her vision blurring. First-class Karen, is Chandra Dotsa Patricia Langford, ich gets FBI on board. A short video, just 43 seconds, captured the entire exchange. From her seat request, the subtle claim of not feeling safe, to Daniel calmly revealing his FBI credentials. 43 seconds. That's all it took to dismantle a reputation built over a lifetime. The views climbed by the second. 12,000, 17,400, 22,000, and counting. The comments were flooding in, caught red-handed, live and in HD. Still being racist in this day and age? She's done. That FBI clapback was smooth but savage. Patricia didn't look at anyone. She didn't speak. The plane hadn't even taken off. But her world had already come crashing down. And the worst part? The story had only just begun. The flight from Dallas had just landed at Reagan National Airport. Before the plane even came to a complete stop, Patricia Langford was already on her feet, trying to slip out of first class as quickly as possible. Like somehow beating the crowd might salvage what was left of her dignity. She grabbed her bag, in haste, head down, avoiding eye contact, but the eyes around her stayed fixed, not out of curiosity, but because they knew. They knew exactly who she was. The moment she stepped into the terminal, the air grew thick, not because of the crowd, but because of the cameras. In front of her, a swarm of reporters waited, microphones, cameras, lights blinding her on impact. "That's her! It's her!" one reporter shouted. Patricia froze. Whatever faint hope she had vanished. She hadn't even caught her breath before a mic was shoved in her face. "Ms. Langford, is it true you tried to remove an FBI agent from his first-class seat? Do you have anything to say about the viral video? Are you aware you're under review for accusations of discriminatory behavior on a federal flight?" Patricia instinctively backed away. A few passengers who had just deboarded glanced at their phones, quickly verifying what was unfolding. It took seconds on Twitter, Reddit, or TikTok. Patricia Langford was trending in the top 3 nationwide. FBI flight, Karen. Patricia Langford. First class fail. A longer video had been edited and posted, complete with dramatic zooms, tense music, and the caption, "The woman who thought she could kick out anyone, until the FBI stood up." 2 million views. 86,000 shares. And the worst part? Her name, title, place of work, and her previously pristine reputation had all been exposed. Patricia turned and ran from the cameras, gasping for air. Her heels ached, but she didn't stop. All she wanted was to disappear, hide from the nightmare that was growing by the minute. Out on the curb, she flagged down a taxi. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, missed calls, emails, coming in so fast her phone nearly froze. Then a call from an unknown number lit up the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Langford, this is James Rollins, chairman of the Marion Foundation Board." Patricia swallowed hard. The Marion Foundation, where she'd served on the board for over 12 years, the face of leadership, equity, and social justice. I know this is going viral," she stammered. "It's not just viral, Patricia. The clip aired on Good Morning America. We held an emergency meeting, and per unanimous decision, you'll need to submit your resignation by tomorrow morning. There will be no negotiations." Click. The call ended, cold and final. Patricia stood in the street, phone in hand, the wind whipping through her hair. Her lips trembled. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her position, her credibility, and the public image she had spent a lifetime cultivating. A taxi pulled up. She climbed in silently, her hands clenched tight around her skirt, as if holding herself together. But the storm hadn't passed. When she got home, Patricia turned on the TV, only to see herself on screen, pointing toward Daniel on the plane as a news anchor announced. The woman accused of racial profiling an FBI agent mid-flight. The video is taking the nation by storm. She is currently affiliated with several human rights organizations. Patricia turned the TV off, but no matter how many times she turned it off, it would keep playing. And the internet never turns off. She collapsed onto the sofa, head in her hands, breath heavy. And maybe, for the first time in her life, Patricia Langford understood what true helplessness felt like. And the story wasn't over, because the price of prejudice, of pride, always arrives too late. Patricia Langford's home sat tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Once it was a place she proudly showcased to friends, a reflection of the success and status she had spent decades building. But that afternoon, as she stepped through the door, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like an interrogation room. The curtains were drawn, the lights off. She didn't even dare turn on the Wi-Fi. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from acquaintances, former colleagues, business partners. Some offered gentle concern. Others sent nothing but a single sentence: "You've become the nation's cautionary tale." Patricia hurled the phone onto the table, clutching her head. She could still hear the sarcastic applause from the plane, the piercing stares of fellow passengers, Emily the flight attendant's icy tone, and the flash of the FBI badge in Daniel Stokes's hand. His name was everywhere now. Calm black. Federal agent confronts racial profiling mid-air. FBI doesn't need a gun, just a laptop and a look. She thought she controlled everything. She was wrong. The hashtag #Chiachula Patricia Langford was now paired with shameful emojis. Old photos resurfaced, captioned with scathing remarks. Even charities she had supported released statements announcing they were cutting ties. The name Langford, once a symbol of success, was now just another meme on TikTok and Twitter. Patricia sat in silence for hours, in the dark. No food, no sleep, no tears. She tried to stay composed, telling herself this was temporary. That soon, a new scandal would emerge and the world would move on. But deep down, she knew. Some stains never fade, especially when they're etched into millions of screens. The doorbell rang. She flinched, cautiously crept toward the window, pulling the curtain back just a sliver. A news van sat parked at the curb. A female reporter stood with a mic in hand, the camera light beaming straight at her door. We're live outside the residence of Patricia Langford, the woman accused of discriminatory conduct against a federal agent aboard a domestic flight. Patricia backed away, slammed the curtain shut, stood frozen in the middle of the room. Her living room window had become a stage, and she, the lead actress, was being scrutinized through the lens of a global, unblinking audience. The phone rang. Again. She looked at the screen. It was her attorney. "I think you should prepare for the worst," he said bluntly. "There may be legal action. You could face charges for deliberately making a false claim against a federal officer on a public flight. If indicted, there'll be both criminal and civil consequences." Patricia felt like the blood had drained from her body. From one seemingly harmless sentence, she had triggered a chain reaction beyond her control. Everything she once possessed, reputation, position, connections, image, was collapsing like dominoes. Not because of Daniel Stokes's actions, but because of her own, and because of the terrifying power of his silence. Daniel Stokes, who never raised his voice, never retaliated, never flinched. Just one look, one badge, one unshakable calm. And that was enough. When night fell, Patricia turned on the TV for the first time. She landed on a news segment, analyzing the incident through a sociological lens. Why do some still believe that power is the privilege of skin color? She turned the TV off. But this time, it wasn't out of anger. It was because she understood. For the first time in her life, Patricia Langford truly understood. Some lessons can't be bought with money. They must be paid for with pride. And so she sat there, in the dark, listening to the slow, echoing collapse of her once glorious empire. Bit by bit, piece by piece. 3 weeks after the incident, Patricia Langford's house had fallen into an eerie silence. No more calls from the press, no more reporters ringing the bell every 5 minutes, but the quiet wasn't peace. It was aftershock. Charitable organizations struck her name off their boards. A board of directors denied her request for an emergency meeting. The financial firm where she served as a senior advisor announced it was re-evaluating its partnership contract. And her personal social media, once filled with images of yacht getaways, handshakes with politicians, and 5-star galas, had become a battleground of comments. What century do you think you're living in? You really thought power could define right and wrong? Your gaze is the reason this world still struggles to heal. Patricia read every line. At first, anger, then defensiveness, but slowly, silence. One afternoon, she reopened the video, for the first time since it went viral. She watched herself, cold expression, judgmental glance, tone dripping with condescension, and Daniel Stokes, seated calmly, unshaken, unfazed, not once retaliating. Just a single, poised question. "Ma'am, would you like to file a formal complaint?" She hadn't been able to answer then. And now, watching again, she understood why. Because she'd never truly considered the possibility of facing real consequences. That night, she wrote a letter by hand, something she hadn't done since her youth, and mailed it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Dear Agent Daniel Stokes, I'm writing today not to justify and not to seek forgiveness. I simply want to face myself, just once, without lies. On that flight, I acted with the blind arrogance of someone who believed status gave them the right to judge others. I wasn't used to being challenged. I wasn't used to being ignored. And I especially wasn't used to realizing that the person in the wrong was me. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't threaten. You simply existed, and that was enough to make me look in the mirror for the first time in years. Thank you, not for forgiving me, but for refusing to turn me into your revenge. You taught me what no one ever dared to say. Power doesn't lie, in the loudest voice, but in unshakable dignity. I'm starting over, from the bottom, but this time, I'm no longer lying to myself. Respectfully, Patricia Langford." The letter was never answered, but it became part of a journey she had begun, not for image, not for redemption, but simply to be real. A month later, Patricia quietly attended a community forum on public space discrimination, not as a speaker, not as a guest of honor. She sat in the last row, listening. During the open mic portion, a black college student stood up and shared how, at an international summit, he had been asked to move to a lower seat because he wasn't wearing a tie. The room buzzed with murmurs. Patricia stood. Her voice was soft but steady. "I used to believe I could decide who belonged where, just with a glance. And then the world reminded me, where you sit doesn't define you. What you do is what makes you worthy of your seat." The room fell silent. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, but sincere. Enough to let her know that, even if just one step at a time, she was walking in the right direction. And Daniel Stokes? He never went to the media, never wrote a piece, never gave an interview. 1 month later, he posted a single sentence on his personal page. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. After that fateful flight, Daniel Stokes returned to his quiet, ordinary life. No long posts, no press conferences, no outrage, no debates. For him, everything had been crystal clear the moment he pulled out his FBI badge. Not to humiliate, but to prove truth doesn't need to shout. He still showed up at the office each morning, sat at his desk like every other agent. The cases kept coming. The thick files still waited to be solved. He remained serious, composed, silent. Sometimes a colleague would stop by, half joking, "Well, you're famous now." That flight clip went viral. Daniel would only offer a quiet smile, saying nothing more. He knew some things shouldn't be left to laughter. Some lessons belong in silence. The only thing he ever posted online was a short status. Not everyone who stays silent is powerless. Some just choose to speak through dignity. One quiet weekend afternoon, Daniel stopped by a used bookstore in Southeast D.C., a place where he often found peace after long days. As he stepped out, a voice called softly behind him, "Agent Stokes?" He turned around. A young woman, in her 20s, soft curls, eyes full of gratitude. I just wanted to thank you, on behalf of my little brother and my whole family." Daniel blinked, about to speak, but the young woman continued, "My mom's a flight attendant. She's been insulted before, just because of the color of her skin. When she watched that clip, she cried. Not because of the offense, but because for the first time, someone stood up for dignity without ever raising their voice." The girl smiled, eyes glistening. She said, "That was the first time I saw a man stay silent and make the whole cabin fall silent too." Daniel smiled, unsure what to say. He simply nodded. He didn't need praise. He only needed to know he'd stood his ground when it mattered most. As for Patricia Langford, after stepping away from every board and organization, she chose to settle in a quiet suburb. In a rare interview months later, the host asked, "Do you regret sitting next to Daniel Stokes that day?" Patricia paused, then replied, "Yes, but not because of who he was. I regret it because I saw who I really was. When faced with someone I couldn't control, I learned the most painful lesson of my life. Power never comes with the privilege to belittle others." A year later, the Washington Journal published a special feature, "Silent Moments That Changed Society." The final page showed a blurred photo of Daniel on the plane, his FBI badge catching a warm gleam of cabin light. Below it, a caption read, "He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to retaliate. He just stood there so the world could see that sometimes justice doesn't need weapons. It only needs a calm stare." The journey toward justice doesn't always begin with a gavel. Sometimes it starts with eye contact, a quiet question, a badge raised at the right moment. And people, like Daniel Stokes, who never chase the spotlight, it's their calm that makes an entire society pause and think. That flight may have landed long ago, but the lesson it carried is still soaring. Reagan Airport was nearly empty when Daniel Stokes stepped out of the domestic arrivals gate. He rolled his suitcase quietly. No welcoming crowd, no flashing cameras, no applause. Just the way he liked it. Unlike the storm still raging online, his real life continued in its usual simplicity. No one saw the late nights spent poring over case files, the skipped meals, the phone calls home. "I can't make it back for the holidays, Mom." Daniel never set out to become a symbol. He just did what was right. The way his father once taught him, "The loudest voice isn't the strongest. The strongest knows when to speak and when to stay silent." A few days after the incident, in a high school classroom on the outskirts of Maryland, a social studies teacher played the now famous clip. She said nothing. The students sat in silence. When the video ended, a brown-skinned boy whispered, "Miss, was he angry?" The teacher smiled gently and replied, "Maybe, but he chose calm to face prejudice, and that made him stronger than any shouting ever could." A girl in the middle row clasped her hands and murmured, "I want to grow up to be like him." Not a superhero, no cape, just an ordinary man. One quiet act, yet powerful enough to shift a generation's perspective. As for Patricia, she had resigned from every board, lost business contracts, and declined all interview requests. In the days that followed, she began to read. Not fashion magazines, but books on bias, on racial history, on the society she had long viewed through the lens of privilege. One spring evening, she posted her first message after months of silence. "I was wrong, not because I got caught, but because I lived too long in a world that never asked questions. That man didn't have to speak, because my actions exposed me. And the harshest lesson? I wasn't shamed, I shamed myself." No one knew if her words could restore her reputation, but thousands of shares said one thing loud and clear: people can make mistakes, as long as they're willing to face them. Weeks later, Daniel received a short email. "Agent Stokes, I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for not making me a victim of myself." "Patricia Langford." Daniel didn't reply. He simply marked it as read. No hatred, just a quiet ending to a chapter he never wanted spotlighted. That flight may have landed, but the journey didn't end at the terminal. It continued. In the minds of those who witnessed it, in the way society re-examines itself over a video, less than 3 minutes long, in the eyes of children realizing for the first time, sometimes justice doesn't wear handcuffs or carry a badge. Sometimes it's a steady gaze and uncompromising silence. And Daniel Stokes? He didn't give speeches, he didn't lead movements, he just did the right thing. In a moment where many would have chosen otherwise, and perhaps people like him are the reason this world still has a chance to change. Sometimes a glance, a word, an unconscious act can reshape an entire life, not because we were caught, but because for the first time we had to face ourselves. If you've ever assumed you knew someone just by looking at them, remember, at 30,000 feet there are no seats reserved for judgment. Only two kinds of people remain: those who show respect and those still learning how to be human. If this story made you think, don't forget to subscribe. Join us in sharing everyday stories that change us forever. We'll see you in the next one, and remember, the biggest lessons often come from the smallest moments.